They were once the kings of the battlefield, armored, unstoppable, and feared. Tanks. For over a century, they defined ground combat. From the muddy trenches of World War I to the deserts of Iraq, no military power dared march without them. But in 2022, something extraordinary happened. A new war, in Ukraine, challenged everything we thought we knew. In the skies above shattered cities and scorched fields, small buzzing machines began rewriting the rules of warfare. Not multi-million-dollar aircraft, not cutting-edge satellites, but drones, some no bigger than a backpack. Others modified civilian quadcopters, dropping explosives with lethal precision on tanks that cost millions. Suddenly, the balance of power didn't belong to those with the most armor. It belonged to those with the best eyes in the sky and the fastest software on the ground. This wasn't just a tactical shift. It was a strategic earthquake. Ukrainian forces, often outgunned and outnumbered, began neutralizing Russian tanks at scale. In some cases, for the price of a smartphone and some duct tape. Analysts were stunned. Generals took notes. Defense contractors scrambled. What began as improvisation became innovation, and what seemed like a niche tactic became a blueprint for future wars. But how did we get here? In this documentary, we'll trace the story from the invention of tanks to the rise of military drones. We'll go inside the digital battlegrounds of Ukraine, from off-the-shelf DJI drones turned deadly to Turkey's Bayraktar TB2s becoming battlefield legends. You'll see how code, cameras, and consumer tech shattered century-old assumptions, and why every military planner in the world is now asking, in the next war, will tanks even matter? This is more than a story about machines. It's about how one nation's desperate creativity, under fire, reshaped the very nature of combat. Before drones could stalk armored columns, and before tanks found themselves vulnerable to a buzzing threat above, there were two separate revolutions, one on the ground and one in the sky. Let's start in the mud of World War I. 1916. The Battle of the Somme. The British Army unveiled something the world had never seen. The tank. A massive metal beast crawling across no man's land, impervious to bullets and barbed wire. It was slow, clunky, and mechanically unreliable, but it terrified German soldiers. It wasn't just a weapon, it was psychological shock and awe. Over the decades, tanks evolved from lumbering iron boxes to sleek mobile firepower platforms. From the German Tiger to the Soviet T-72 to the American Abrams, tanks became the very symbol of military dominance. But high above, a quieter revolution was taking shape. As early as World War II, both Axis and Allied powers were experimenting with remote-controlled aircraft. These early drones were crude, glorified radio-controlled bombs like the German V-1 flying bomb or the American TDR-1. Their purpose was limited and mostly expendable. In the Cold War, surveillance took center stage. Drones became spies, flying over enemy territory, snapping images, then crashing or returning with film. The U.S. Ryan Firebee, and later the Israeli pioneer in the 1980s, hinted at the future. But few realized just how transformational they'd become. Meanwhile, the tank's dominance remained largely unchallenged. In conflicts from Korea to Iraq, tanks rolled through cities and deserts, supported by infantry and air power. Yes, they were vulnerable to airstrikes or anti-tank missiles, but those threats were expensive, required coordination, and often came from major powers. What no one truly anticipated was a world where a teenager with a joystick could target a $10 million tank using a $1,000 drone. In the 1990s and early 2000s, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, began gaining traction, particularly the U.S. Predator drone, which changed the game with live surveillance and precision missile strikes in Afghanistan and Iraq. But those drones were massive, expensive, and state-controlled. They were powerful, but not democratized. At the same time, commercial technology was advancing fast. Civilian quadcopters became cheaper, smaller, and more stable. Add a GoPro camera and GPS, and suddenly any hobbyist could fly what was, a decade earlier, considered military-grade reconnaissance. Yet the true precursor to Ukraine's drone revolution wasn't just technological. It was strategic desperation and adaptability. In 2014, during Russia's annexation of Crimea and the initial Donbas War, Ukraine's forces realized they were outmatched in traditional firepower. That's when grassroots drone units began to form. Civilians, tinkerers, engineers, even teenagers started modifying commercial drones to spot artillery targets or drop grenades. These weren't sanctioned military units. They were improvisers working out of garages and basements, often crowdsourcing funds and parts. And they got results. This blend, old-school tanks born from trench warfare and new-age drones shaped by consumer tech, created a collision course, a slow, armored legacy weapon against a fast, airborne, decentralized threat. One evolved for industrial-age warfare, the other born in the digital era. By the time the full-scale invasion began in 2022, the stage was set, and the tank, for the first time in its 100-year history, was about to meet a challenger it couldn't see and couldn't stop. In war, desperation breeds invention. And for Ukraine, the 2014 annexation of Crimea was the first shockwave. Ukrainian forces, under-equipped and technologically behind their Russian adversaries, had to innovate or be overrun. And it was in this pressure cooker that the earliest battlefield drones began to appear. But unlike the sleek, billion-dollar systems used by superpowers, these prototypes were hacked together from civilian tech. The first spark came not from defense contractors, but from basements, backyards, and crowdfunding campaigns. Ukrainian volunteer groups, such as Aerorozvidka, emerged as digital militias, made up of engineers, hobbyists, coders, and drone racers. They began modifying off-the-shelf DJI drones for battlefield use. With basic 3D printed attachments and modified controllers, these buzzing devices became reconnaissance tools, artillery spotters, and eventually, lethal strike platforms. Aerorozvidka's evolution from a volunteer project to a formal military unit marked a turning point. Their first major innovation? A thermal imaging-equipped drone capable of locating enemy artillery at night and relaying coordinates to Ukrainian gunners in real time. Suddenly, the fog of war was lifting, one pixel at a time. Meanwhile, parallel efforts experimented with adapting drones for direct attack. The breakthrough came with custom rigs that allowed commercial drones to carry and drop modified hand grenades or small explosive charges with surprising accuracy. It wasn't elegant and it wasn't always safe, but it worked. Russian convoys, artillery positions, and eventually tanks began suffering losses from devices that cost a fraction of their targets. But the real leap came when Ukraine integrated its grassroots drone efforts with its formal military strategy. In the early months of the 2022 invasion, footage began circulating online, captured by drones, showing precise hits on Russian armor columns. Many of these strikes were coordinated in real time using Starlink internet systems donated by SpaceX, providing stable, mobile communications on the front lines. What had begun as a garage experiment was now fully networked warfare. On a larger scale, the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 drone emerged as a battlefield icon. Originally introduced before the invasion, the TB2 was a lightweight, medium-altitude drone capable of both surveillance and precision strikes. Operated by a small crew with a ground control station, it proved devastating against Russian tank columns and air defense systems. Its cost-effectiveness was equally stunning, each unit costing only a few $1,000,000 compared to the tens of millions it destroyed in armored assets. In one now famous early operation during the 2022 invasion, Ukrainian forces used TB2s to locate and destroy a key Russian pontoon bridge over the Dnipro River, halting an attempted crossing and causing chaos among retreating Russian units. This wasn't just a tactical success. It was a proof of concept. Drones could cripple logistics and maneuver warfare, traditional tank advantages at scale. The psychological impact was just as profound. Russian tank crews began abandoning vehicles if drones were spotted overhead. Ukrainian propaganda units leaned into this, producing music videos and memes celebrating the Bayraktar's heroics. For the first time in modern memory, a drone became a cultural icon of resistance. Behind the scenes, Ukraine's defense ministry began formalizing its drone programs. They funded research, streamlined procurement, and coordinated between military branches and civilian innovators. Hackathons and coding competitions led to software upgrades that improved targeting and evasion. The defense-industrial divide shrank, replaced by a wartime innovation ecosystem fueled by urgency and collaboration. Technical challenges weren't absent. Drones suffered from jamming, limited range, and harsh weather. Russia began deploying sophisticated electronic warfare systems to disable or mislead them. But Ukraine adapted fast, switching frequencies, using signal boosters, and even developing semi-autonomous targeting software to reduce reliance on operator control. Perhaps the most striking breakthrough was the marriage of drone footage with open-source intelligence. Civilian analysts on Twitter and Telegram began assisting Ukrainian units by geolocating drone videos, spotting enemy positions, and even coordinating strikes with open maps. It was real-time crowdsourced warfare, unprecedented in modern combat. What had started as scattered improvisation had, by mid-2022, solidified into a coherent, multi-layered drone warfare doctrine. From pocket-sized FPV kamikaze drones to long-range surveillance platforms like the TB2, Ukraine had turned the battlefield into a 3D chessboard, where speed, data, and adaptability mattered more than armor or size. In short, the spark had ignited a fire, and the tank, once the pinnacle of ground warfare, found itself hunted. Not by bigger guns or faster missiles, but by the quiet whir of electric rotors above. By 2022, the war in Ukraine became the crucible where 20th century armored warfare collided head-on with 21st century drone innovation. But this wasn't just a moment. It was a progression, a sharp evolutionary arc, forged in battle, refined in real time, and accelerated by necessity. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, it unleashed thousands of tanks, T-72s, T-80s, and even the upgraded T-90s. The strategy was familiar. Blitzkrieg-style movements supported by overwhelming firepower. But something unexpected happened. In the very first weeks, footage began to surface. Russian tanks exploding in convoys, ambushed in forests, and stranded on roads. The culprits, often a drone. At the beginning, the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 emerged as the symbolic spearhead of Ukraine's drone resistance. Armed with laser-guided MAML munitions, the TB2 became a precision strike platform capable of disabling tanks, command vehicles, and air defenses, all at a fraction of the cost of traditional air sorties. But the TB2 wasn't new. It had seen action in Syria, Libya, and Nagorno-Karabakh. What was new was how Ukraine made it the centerpiece of asymmetric resistance, publicizing each kill, turning the drone into both a military and morale weapon. The internet was flooded with music, videos, drone footage, and memes, amplifying the psychological impact far beyond the battlefield. Then came the next shift, the rise of the commercial drone. Civilian quadcopters like the DJI Mavic and Matrice, originally built for photography and agriculture, were quickly repurposed for reconnaissance, then for attack. Ukrainian units began modifying these small, quiet drones to drop grenades, mortar shells, and even RPG warheads. The cost? Often under $1,000. The damage? A tank worth $3 million could be destroyed or disabled. 2023 marked a major turning point, the institutionalization of the drone corps. Ukraine formally created units dedicated solely to unmanned aerial systems, UAS. These weren't rogue hobbyists anymore. They were trained soldiers with doctrine, playbooks, and rapidly evolving tactics. Meanwhile, software caught up. Real-time mapping, GPS spoofing resistance, and AI-powered targeting improved drastically. Some units could now coordinate drone swarms, dozens of small craft overwhelming enemy defenses in seconds. As Ukraine advanced its drone capabilities, Russia responded with brute force and quantity. Iran supplied Shahed 136 loitering munitions, known in Ukraine as mopeds for their whining engine noise, became a nightly terror in cities. These were cheap, slow, and simple, but deployed en masse, they drained Ukrainian air defense resources. Yet Ukraine adapted again. Mobile air defense units, electronic warfare trucks, and even shotgun-wielding drone hunters patrolled urban areas. The countermeasures race intensified. On the Russian side, new armor cages, nicknamed cope cages, began appearing on tanks to deflect drone-dropped munitions. Ukraine, in turn, evolved its payloads. 3D-printed bomb fins increased accuracy. FPV, first-person view racing drones, guided by human pilots via live video feeds, became kamikaze weapons, smashing directly into targets with high explosive charges. One Ukrainian unit, Code 9.2, reportedly carried out hundreds of successful FPV strikes in a single month. But perhaps the biggest leap came in integration. Ukrainian units started using combined drone operations. One drone scouting, another jamming communications, a third striking. Others coordinated with artillery, spotting targets and guiding shells with real-time corrections. This wasn't just innovation, it was doctrinal reinvention. A single drone operator with a screen and a joystick could now direct more firepower than a Cold War-era artillery battery. Meanwhile, Russia adapted too, deploying Lancet loitering munitions, improving electronic warfare capabilities, and launching dedicated drone attack brigades. The war became a brutal feedback loop. Drones strike, the enemy counters, new drones adapt. Repeat. Each side learned, and learned fast. By late 2023, both nations began mass-producing drones at scale. Ukraine announced the goal of building 1 million drones in 2024. From micro surveillance units to heavy-duty kamikazes, civilian companies, 3D printing workshops, and even university labs were enlisted in a wartime drone economy. This wasn't just a military armament, it was an industrial mobilization. At the same time, software-defined warfare emerged as the invisible backbone of the drone revolution. Open-source apps like Delta allowed Ukrainian troops to see the live positions of friendly and enemy units, updated by drone feeds. AI-assisted target recognition became more common. Machine vision allowed drones to independently identify and strike tanks, raising difficult questions about autonomous lethality. By 2024, the battlefield had morphed into a living drone laboratory. Skirmishes became case studies. Each village fight or forest ambush revealed what worked and what didn't. Tactical evolution that used to take years now occurred in weeks. But this wasn't just about machines. The human element, the drone pilot, became a new kind of warfighter. Teenagers who grew up flying racing drones now trained to fly FPV bombers into tanks. A steady stream of GoPro footage from pilot perspectives flooded Telegram and YouTube, turning drone warfare into a digital spectator sport. Part war diary, part psychological operation. Throughout, Western military analysts watched closely. NATO nations began rewriting doctrines. The U.S. Army launched new drone warfare units. German, British, and French defense ministries ordered thousands of loitering munitions. What began as a desperate improvisation in Ukraine was now shaping global military planning. And the tank, it didn't disappear. It adapted. Ukrainian forces, still reliant on armored vehicles for breakthroughs, began equipping their tanks with drone jammers and aerial spotters. Russia, too, integrated drone surveillance into armored operations. Tanks no longer led blindly. They moved when the drones gave them the green light. The evolution wasn't linear. It was chaotic, decentralized, and deeply human. a messy convergence of off-the-shelf tech, battlefield urgency, and strategic vision. What emerged was not the death of the tank, nor the rise of the drone alone. It was something new, a battlefield reshaped by the constant interaction between steel and circuit, between armor and algorithm. And so, from the frozen fields of Bakhmut to the wheat plains of Zaporizhia, a new type of warfare was born, not in labs or think tanks, but in trenches, garages, and server rooms. The war in Ukraine didn't just deploy drones, it redefined what they could do. The war in Ukraine didn't just change the battlefield, it changed how societies thought about war. Before 2022, drones were tools for surveillance or the occasional targeted strike in distant counterterrorism operations. But after Ukraine, they became household terms, symbols of resilience, innovation, and a new kind of combat. The revolution wasn't just military, it was cultural, economic, and deeply psychological. For the first time in modern history, citizens became combatants through drone networks. In Ukraine, civilians donated commercial drones, joined crowdfunding campaigns, and even helped identify targets via open-source intelligence platforms like Telegram. Young people who once flew FPV drones for sport were suddenly volunteering at the front lines, training soldiers, building bomb release systems, or piloting kamikaze drones from bunkers. The lines blurred between civilian and military, public and private. Hundreds of local tech startups, university labs, and garage tinkerers contributed to what became a national movement. This wasn't top-down military procurement. It was grassroots, crowdsourced innovation at war speed. Meanwhile, the international ripple effects were immediate. Global defense ministries, especially in NATO countries, rewrote their doctrines almost overnight. Military planners saw that the age of massive tank columns and traditional air superiority was no longer guaranteed. Instead, cheap, fast, scalable drone warfare offered a disruptive alternative, and smaller nations took note. Countries like Taiwan, Poland, and Finland began investing in indigenous drone development. The US and UK rushed to establish drone swarms and autonomous systems in their war games. Even Africa and Latin America saw surging interest in low-cost drone warfare, a new military equalizer for those who could never afford stealth fighters or Abrams tanks. Commercial industries also shifted. Companies like DJI were forced to navigate export bans and ethical questions about dual-use technologies. At the same time, a new arms race was born in the private sector, with defense tech startups proliferating across Europe, Israel, and the US, offering modular drones, AI targeting systems, and even counter-drone drones. The public perception of war changed too. Live drone footage brought the battlefield into people's phones. No longer were wars distant, abstract affairs. Now, millions watched in real time as drones dropped munitions into tank hatches, chased soldiers through trenches, or disabled convoys with shocking precision. War had gone viral, and with it came a profound psychological shift. It created empathy in some, but also desensitization. For Ukrainian civilians, drone alerts became part of daily life. For Russian troops, paranoia set in. Every overhead buzz, every unexplained explosion could be the start of an invisible attack from above. The revolution was also ethical. As AI targeting and autonomous systems improved, experts worldwide asked, who bears responsibility when a machine makes a kill? Ukraine's rapid use of AI-assisted drones triggered urgent debates in Geneva, Brussels, and Silicon Valley. The war had leapt far ahead of existing laws. In the end, the societal shift wasn't just about technology. It was about access. The Ukraine war showed that warfighting power could be democratized, not in the idealistic sense, but in the practical one. You didn't need a fighter jet to strike a tank anymore. You just needed a drone, a smartphone, and a purpose. And that changed everything. Since the early days of the Ukraine war, drone warfare hasn't just matured, it's fragmented, diversified, and become far more lethal. What began with modified DJI quadcopters and repurposed consumer drones has now evolved into a full-spectrum ecosystem of unmanned systems, operating across land, air, and sea. As of 2025, both Ukraine and Russia deployed dozens of drone variants, each tailored for specific missions, from ultra-low altitude trench runners to long-range strike drones with satellite guidance. In Ukraine, innovation remains relentless. FPV drones, once flown manually by volunteers, are now semi-autonomous and built en masse in underground workshops. 3D printed components have slashed costs and allowed rapid customization. Ukraine's Army of Drones initiative, backed by both the state and civilian tech networks, has transformed the battlefield into a testing ground for next-gen tactics. Swarms, loitering munitions, and AI-enhanced reconnaissance are now standard tools of war. Russia, too, has adapted. After early setbacks, it ramped up domestic drone production and embraced Iranian-made Shahed drones and variants like the Garan 2. But more importantly, Russia developed a sophisticated counter-drone strategy, combining jamming, decoys, and layered electronic warfare to degrade Ukraine's drone advantage. In response, Ukraine is now fielding hardened drones equipped with anti-jam systems, frequency-hopping protocols, and pre-programmed strike paths. This arms race between drones and counter-drones is defining the modern battlefield. New players have also emerged. Turkey's Bayraktar TB2, once a media darling, has been supplemented by smaller, more survivable drones. Israel's Harop loitering munitions are now influencing designs worldwide. In Asia, Taiwan's military prepares for asymmetric drone warfare as a hedge against China, while South Korea tests autonomous resupply drones for contested zones. Defense industries have shifted. Western companies are now pivoting away from large, costly platforms towards scalable modular drone systems. U.S. programs like Replicator aim to deploy thousands of autonomous drones rapidly, with a quantity has a quality all its own mindset. In Europe, NATO allies are investing heavily in interoperability, making sure their drones can communicate, coordinate, and strike as one digital force. Beyond the battlefield, drones are reshaping logistics, surveillance, and even humanitarian missions. In Ukraine, drones are used to deliver medical supplies across broken front lines. In Gaza, drones conduct search and rescue and damage assessment. In Africa, drones monitor illegal mining and poaching. The technology has spilled over, rapidly becoming dual use. But with datos, these advances come concerns. Jamming warfare has escalated. Both Ukraine and Russia now use sophisticated EW, electronic warfare units, to create dead zones, areas where GPS fails and communications collapse. This has forced engineers to develop fallback systems, like terrain-following navigation or visual AI mapping. Meanwhile, the question of autonomy looms large. Drones can now identify, track, and engage targets without human input. While Ukraine claims to retain human-in-the-loop safeguards, leaked reports suggest that fully autonomous strikes may have already occurred on both sides. International watchdogs are alarmed, not just by the technology, but by the pace at which it's becoming normalized. At the same time, civilian casualties and ethical dilemmas are rising. With drones flying 24/7, privacy is nearly impossible in active war zones. Civilians risk being misidentified by machine vision. And drone warfare, so accessible, so reproducible, is now being exported to conflicts in Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Today, drones are no longer just tools. They are strategic assets, tactical weapons, and symbols of power. Their design has become smarter. Their missions more complex. Their consequences more permanent. And while Ukraine continues to refine its tactics in real time, the rest of the world is watching and preparing. Before Ukraine, the image of modern war still conjured visions of tank battalions thundering across plains, jet fighters streaking overhead, and boots on the ground seizing territory inch by inch. But after 2022, everything changed. The war in Ukraine didn't just introduce drones, it normalized them as a central pillar of military strategy. Drones became the eyes, ears, and often the fists of the modern battlefield. And their impact has rippled far beyond the borders of Eastern Europe, where once a tank represented the pinnacle of battlefield dominance. Drones exposed its vulnerabilities with chilling efficiency. One-man teams, operating off a tablet or goggles, could now destroy multi-million-dollar armored vehicles with a few $100s worth of tech. The psychological shift this caused was immense, not just for soldiers in the field, but for global militaries watching from afar. The tank, long seen as a symbol of unstoppable force, suddenly looked exposed, obsolete even. The legacy of Ukraine's drone revolution is technological, tactical, and strategic. On a tactical level, it redefined how battles are fought. Frontline commanders now demand real-time drone feeds before making a move. On the strategic level, countries have had to rewrite doctrines that had stood for decades. Militaries around the world, from NATO to India to Israel, now have standing drone units and dedicated counter-drone programs. Perhaps the most profound legacy lies in accessibility. Ukraine proved that you don't need a trillion-dollar defense budget to build an effective air force. You need ingenuity, connectivity, and a decentralized support network. Civilian volunteers, garage engineers, coders, and even gamers played a part in shaping Ukraine's drone tactics. That model, distributed, adaptive, and fast, is now being replicated globally. And finally, there's the human legacy. Ukrainian soldiers have named their drones, mourned their loss, and celebrated their victories like comrades. The bond between pilot and machine became something deeply personal. In the end, drone warfare didn't just change how wars are fought. It changed who fights, why they fight, and what it means to win. A new era was born in Ukraine, and war, as we knew it, will never be the same. So, what's next? If Ukraine's battlefield was the proving ground, the future is already under construction in labs, startups, and military academies around the world. One clear trend is greater autonomy. Today's drones still rely heavily on human operators. Tomorrow's may not. Artificial intelligence is rapidly advancing to the point where drones could identify, track, and engage targets on their own, reacting in milliseconds, far faster than any human. That introduces both opportunity and enormous ethical risk. We're also witnessing a miniaturization boom. Swarms of micro-drones, too small to be detected by radar, could overwhelm defenses and penetrate deep into enemy territory. Some may not even carry explosives, just sensors, quietly mapping, listening, and watching everything in real time. At the same time, countries are racing to perfect counter-drone technology. Think of laser-based defense systems, electromagnetic jammers, or autonomous hunter drones designed to chase and neutralize incoming threats. The age of drone versus tank may soon become drone versus drone. Civilian tech will play a larger role too. As costs drop and software improves, non-state actors, including militias and criminal groups, may field capabilities once exclusive to militaries. That's both empowering and deeply alarming. On the other side of the coin, some experts speculate about droneless warfare, a return to stealthier, low-tech tactics to avoid constant surveillance. In other words, just as tanks lost dominance, drones too may one day be countered by simplicity, deception, and human cunning. But the central truth remains. Drones have forever changed the rhythm of war. Fast, precise, cheap, adaptive. Now we ask you, will drones make wars shorter or more constant? Will autonomy reduce human risk or increase moral distance? And will the future battlefield be decided by machines or still by the minds that guide them? The future of war is flying toward us. Are we ready to catch it? From the muddy plains of Donbass to the shattered hulks of Russian armor, we've traced a defining shift in modern warfare. The drone didn't just challenge the tank, it redefined the battlefield. What once required millions of dollars and entire battalions can now be done by a teenager with a remote and a flying camera rig. We've seen how Ukraine turned adversity into innovation, how cheap drones outmaneuvered billion-dollar defenses, and how the world's militaries were forced to rethink everything they thought they knew. The tank will never disappear, but it will never again roam the battlefield alone. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the war that changed everything. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, don't forget to like the video, share it with others, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more immersive stories on war, innovation, and the forces shaping our world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed,